Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome back to another explainer. So today we're going to deconstruct something that is honestly truly fascinating. We're constantly surrounded by these gigantic multinational corporations, right? And usually we think of them as these highly visible, totally untouchable entities that were basically born with a silver spoon in their mouth. But today, we are tearing up that assumption. We're going to look at the hidden strategies of monumental corporate empires, the actual real builders of our modern world. Because these titans, they didn't inherit ready-made monopolies. Actually, scratch that, they built them brick by brick, often starting from absolute scratch, facing catastrophic odds and operating almost entirely in the shadows.
Just think about this for a second. How does a single, secretive family feed the entire planet? It sounds literally like science fiction, right? But let's ground this massive, invisible scale in your daily life right now. The salt on your French fries? The flour baked into the bread of your sandwich today? There is a massive chance it was touched, processed, or transported by the infrastructure of one single family. Every single day, the global population consumes goods pushed through this family's massive logistical web. It's just staggering to realize that something as absolutely vital as our global food supply is so heavily centralized by such a phantom-like player.
And here is the paradox. Look at highly visible global brands, companies like Apple or Coca-Cola. Their logos are everywhere. Their ad budgets are astronomical. Now compare that to the stark, absolute invisibility of the Cargill empire. You will not see a single Cargill TV commercial. You won't find a Cargill supermarket down the street. Yet they are officially the largest private company in the United States, generating hundreds of billions of dollars in revenue. By staying private, they completely shield themselves from Wall Street's relentless pressure for public transparency. And that allows them to maintain this almost magical invisibility while moving mountains of money and resources all over the globe.
So how exactly did we get here? Let's get into Chapter 1, the completely invisible colossus. We need to anchor our timeline right here. In 1865, the American Civil War has just ended. The nation is completely traumatized, and it's a time of unprecedented chaos. But, with that chaos comes massive, raw opportunity for reconstruction. Agriculture is rapidly expanding westward, driven by the absolute boom of brand new railway lines. The timing was just perfect to build some new infrastructure.
And this is where our founder, William Wallace Cargill, steps in. Now, his beginning was hyper-modest. We are not talking about cutting-edge tech or some huge Wall Street backing here. His first major asset was literally just this: a single wooden grain warehouse sitting at the very end of a railway line in Iowa. When you contrast this single lonely shack with the thousands of ships and factories the Cargill Empire controls today, the leap is almost incomprehensible.
Which brings us to Chapter 2, the origin of the monopoly. Because that leap wasn't an accident. This wasn't about inventing some complex, revolutionary new product. It was about being in the exact right place at the exact right time to build an infallible, repeatable system. And this brilliantly illustrates the true genius of the operation. The logistics playbook was incredibly simple but devastatingly effective. Step 1, buy a warehouse. Step 2, store other people's production. And Step 3, control the distribution. William Wallace Cargill realized something really profound here. The real value isn't in breaking your back, cultivating the earth to produce the goods. The true power lies in controlling the mandatory middleman choke point. By deciding exactly when and where to sell the farmer's grain using those new railways, he basically controlled the entire market.
So, moving on to Chapter 3, the master of logistics.
You see, you don't always have to make the product if you own the roads it travels on. But what happens when an empire is born not from geographic opportunity, but from crushing desperation? Notice the incredible mirror effect between two entirely different eras here. On one side, we have Frank Mars. Now, you definitely know the name Mars today as a powerhouse, but back then, he had survived polio. His first candy business had spectacularly failed, and he was completely broke in his 30s. On the other side, we have Fabrice Achiuwi, a 35-year-old modern farmer who was facing total agricultural bankruptcy. Corporate empires, they often don't start with massive venture capital. They frequently start from absolute ruin. Desperation acts as an incredible catalyst.
Let's look at Chapter 4, Building on the Ruins.
Back in 1923, Frank Mars was trapped in a dark kitchen, completely broke. It was literally do or die. But in that tiny kitchen, through endless, exhausted trial and error, he invented the Milky Way. That single desperate invention dynamited the global sugar industry and sparked a ferocious family war with his son that eventually birthed M&Ms. And we see this exact same survival reflex in Fabrice Achiuwi's modern turnaround. Staring down bankruptcy, he executed a brilliant three-step pivot. First, he recovered his worthless, unsold fruit stock. Second, he innovated with severe urgency right in his kitchen.
Third, he metamorphosed that basic commodity into high-value, exotic, sublime jams. Think mango honey and banana chocolate. He then aggressively scaled this desperate pivot internationally, hitting trade shows in Monaco, Paris, and all the way out to China. So the starting line clearly does not dictate the finish line.
Which naturally leads us to Chapter 5, the long-term strategy.
Because once an empire is born, surviving the centuries requires an unconventional shield. Let's see how this builds with the story of the Haas family, the direct heirs to Levi Strauss. Look at this gauntlet of global crises they had to navigate. They survived World War I in 1914. They survived the total collapse of purchasing power during the Great Depression in 1929. They navigated the complete redrawing of supply chains in World War II. And they faced down the ruthless explosion of fast fashion in the 1990s. Through sheer resilience, they transformed a simple, utilitarian miner's workwear into a universal, global symbol of freedom.
But surviving all of that meant making radical choices to protect their vision. In 1985, Robert Haas executed a massive, truly audacious $1.6 billion privatization buyout. Why? To remove the company from Wall Street's grip entirely. He knew that the short-term pressure of quarterly earnings would destroy a century-old legacy, so they built an impenetrable shield of privacy, much like Cargill did, to play the long game.
So, the crucial point is how they actually executed this long-term vision. We can decode this using the FHO framework. F is for focus, an unwavering dedication to their flagship Model 51 genes. A is for alignment, making decisions based on a 50-year vision, not a 3-month quarter. H is for heritage, so not being a dusty museum, but constantly reinventing their history for new generations. And O is for optimization, mastering global logistics while utilizing highly localized storytelling. Levi's completely ignored the industry rules of chasing the cheapest possible labor to the bottom. Instead, they focused entirely on exporting cultural value.
And you know, this willingness to ignore the standard rules is a hallmark of all true empire builders. Look at Truett Cathy, the founder of Chick-fil-A. He implemented a strict policy of Sunday closures based on personal conviction. On paper, voluntarily giving up 1/7 of your revenue, especially on a busy weekend, looks like a colossal operational handicap. Or look at George Jenkins, who founded Publix right in the middle of the Great Depression. He utilized an employee ownership model, actually sharing the company with the workers. These unconventional conviction-based strategies seem like terrible weaknesses at the time, but they actually built unshakable multi-billion-dollar foundations of loyalty and efficiency.
Which brings us to the ultimate synthesis of our explainer today. Chapter 6, the DNA of true builders. True empires are never just inherited. Receiving the keys to a kingdom is just the beginning of a brutal test. Maintaining it, growing it, and protecting it demands the relentless DNA of an everyday builder. The proof of this DNA is undeniable across history. Sam Walton started with a single isolated discount store in Arkansas in 1962. J. Willard Marriott started by selling root beer from a tiny street stand in Washington, D.C. in 1927. George Jenkins birthed Publix during the worst economic collapse in modern history. The starting line never dictates the destination. Marriott's incredible leap from street sodas to 5-star global luxury suites proves that starting small is practically a prerequisite for greatness.
And what exactly is the result of that builder's DNA? Well, look no further than the Walton family today. $400 billion. That is the estimated fortune generated by starting small, defying terrible odds, and figuring out how to repeat a successful logistics model infinitely without the supply chain collapsing. It's an intergenerational wealth that exceeds the GDP of many countries, all starting from one little shop.
And if there is one powerful ethos that ties William Wallace Cargill, the Mars family, the Haas dynasty, and all these titans together, it is this: don't wait for conditions to be perfect, create them. Perfect environments simply do not exist in business. If you wait for calm seas, you're going to sink. You have to forge your own reality and impose your own rhythm on the market.
Which leaves us with a truly provocative thought to end on today. We've seen the relentless, century-spanning resilience required to build and maintain these invisible empires. So ask yourself, do today's fast-paced, social media-driven startups, the ones obsessed with immediate gratification and short-term metrics, actually possess the DNA to survive the next century like these historical titans did? It's a really fascinating question to ponder the next time you eat a fry, buy a pair of jeans, or step into a supermarket. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, and I will see you next time.